Welcome to Creepy Whispers. I'm Jack Thompson, and here we'll explore stories that will send chills down your spine. Get ready to dive into the unknown, where each whisper hides a secret. First story, the night my life turned upside down, started like any other, since I'd moved back in with my parents. A few months after ending a complicated relationship, I'd returned to rural Vermont, where I grew up. I was trying to rebuild my life, you know? I got a job at the localer, taking those night shifts nobody wants. It was exhausting, but at least it kept me busy and away from my thoughts. On a particularly cold autumn night, I was driving home after an exhausting shift. My old car's tank was almost empty, so I stopped at a 24-hour gas station by the road. As I was filling up, I felt a heavy gaze on me. Across the pump, a man was staring at me. He was tall, thin, with a piercing look that gave me chills. I tried to ignore it, but I could feel his eyes following me. I quickly entered the store to pay and buy a coffee, hoping he'd be gone when I came out. But when I returned to my car, there he was, standing next to an old pickup truck, still watching me. My heart started racing. I got into the car as fast as I could and drove off, looking in the rearview mirror every few seconds. That's when I realized his pickup was following me. I tried to convince myself it was a coincidence. After all, this was the only road leading to town. But the more I drove, the more certain I became that he was intentionally following me. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it. I tried to calm down, thinking of all the possibilities. Maybe he was just going to the same place as me, or maybe I was getting paranoid after so many hours in the air. But something inside me screamed that it wasn't normal. I decided not to go straight to my parents' house. Instead, I made a sharp turn towards the town center, hoping he'd go straight. But no, the pickup made the same turn. My stomach sank. Now there was no doubt. I was being followed. I started sweating, my fingers gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. I thought about calling the police, but my phone was dead damn. I'd forgotten to charge it during my shift. The streets were deserted at that hour, not a soul in sight to ask for help. I decided to try and lose him, making random turns, accelerating when I could, suddenly slowing down. But nothing worked. The pickup was always there, about 50 meters behind me, like a persistent shadow. I could see its headlights in the rearview mirror, two yellow lights chasing me in the darkness. That's when I realized I had no choice. I had to go home. Maybe there, with my parents, I'd be safe. With my heart in my throat, I finally decided to head home. The road leading there was narrow and winding, surrounded by tall trees that seemed to swallow the headlights. I drove as fast as I could, but the pickup wouldn't give up. Sometimes it got really close, almost touching my bumper. Other times it fell back a bit, as if playing with me. When I finally saw our house at the end of the dirt road, I felt momentary relief. I screeched into the garage, jumped out of the car, and ran to the front door, my hands shaking so much I could barely get the key in the lock. I managed to get in and lock the door behind me, panting. My parents, startled by the noise, came downstairs asking what was going on. I could barely speak, the words coming out between gasps as I tried to explain about the man at the gas station and the chase. That's when we heard it, the sound of tires on the dirt road, slowly approaching the house. My dad ran to the window and saw the pickup parked outside, its headlights illuminating our porch. No one got out of the vehicle, but we could feel the threatening presence. My mom called the local sheriff while my dad grabbed his hunting rifle. We stood there, paralyzed, looking out the window, waiting for the next move. The minutes dragged on like hours as we waited. The pickup remained outside, motionless, like a predator lying in wait. The silence inside the house was so thick, I could hear my own heart pounding in my chest. My mom was whispering on the phone with the sheriff, begging him to come quickly. My dad, rifle in hand, alternated between looking out the window and checking if all doors and windows were really locked. I felt guilty for bringing this danger to my parents' house, for putting them in this terrifying situation. Suddenly, we heard footsteps on the porch. Slow, heavy, deliberate. My stomach turned when I saw a shadow pass by the living room window. The sound of the front door handle turning made my blood run cold. It was locked, of course, but what if he managed to get in? What if he had a gun? My mind was racing with all the horrible possibilities. Then, out of nowhere, we heard the sound of glass breaking coming from the kitchen. My dad ran there, rifle at the ready, while my mom and I remained paralyzed with fear in the living room. I heard my dad yell something, followed by the sound of hurried footsteps and a door slamming. When we finally gathered the courage to go to the kitchen, we saw the broken window and my dad looking outside, the rifle still pointed at the dark yard. The sound of sirens cut through the night, approaching rapidly. We saw the red and blue lights reflecting on the trees, even before the sheriff's car appeared in our driveway. The relief I felt was immense, as if a weight had been lifted from my chest. Sheriff Johnson, a burly man I'd known since childhood, got out of the car with his hand on his gun, looking around cautiously. We quickly explained what had happened while he took notes in a worn notebook. He called for backup on the radio and started searching the property with a powerful flashlight. They found tire marks in the mud near the house and footprints on the porch and around the broken window. But of the mysterious man with the pickup, there was no sign. It was as if they had disappeared into the darkness of the night. The sheriff said they would set up a search in the area and increase patrols in the coming days. He advised us to install security cameras and maybe even consider an alarm system. As he spoke, I couldn't stop looking out the window, afraid of seeing that scary face staring back at me. The night was over, but the nightmare seemed far from over. In the days that followed, living in that house became a constant exercise in paranoia. Every noise, every shadow made me jump. My dad installed security cameras in every corner of the property and changed all the locks. My mom started leaving the lights on all night. I could barely sleep, always waking up startled, thinking I'd heard the sound of tires on the road or footsteps on the porch. Sheriff Johnson came by every day, sometimes twice, to check if everything was okay. But no matter how hard we tried to return to normalcy, that feeling of vulnerability, of having been invaded, wouldn't go away. The worst of all was the guilt I felt. If I hadn't stopped at that gas station, if I had paid more attention, maybe none of this would have happened. My parents said it wasn't my fault, that I was a victim too, but that didn't lessen the weight I carried. I started seriously thinking about moving out, leaving my parents in peace, free from this danger I had brought to them. But at the same time, the idea of being alone somewhere terrified me. What if that man found me again? What if this time there was no one to help me? I felt trapped, cornered between the fear of staying and the fear of leaving. Weeks passed, and there were no more signs of the mysterious man or the pickup. The police couldn't find any concrete clues. No security cameras in the area had captured clear images of the vehicle or the driver. It was as if it had all been a collective hallucination, if it weren't for the broken window and the tire marks we could still see in the yard. Gradually, the routine started to return to normal, but something had definitely changed. I wasn't the same. My parents weren't the same. That feeling of safety we had in our own home had been lost forever. Today, months after the incident, I still find myself looking over my shoulder when I go out. I still avoid gas stations at night and get tense when I see an old pickup approaching. I changed my hours at the hospital, avoiding night shifts. My parents insist that I'm safe, that it was an isolated event, but deep down, I know they were affected too. Sometimes when I'm lying in bed at night, I try to understand what really happened that night. Who was that man? What did he want? Why me? Questions that will probably never have answers. All I know is that night at the gas station changed my life forever, showing me how fragile our sense of security is and how, in a matter of minutes, our whole world can turn upside down. Second story. I still shudder when I remember that terrifying night during my trip from New York to Florida. I had been driving for hours, exhausted and hungry, when I spotted the familiar Five Guys sign by the roadside. It was past midnight, and the sight of that sign was like an oasis in the desert. I thought with relief, how lucky. I'll stop, grab a burger, and then continue my journey. Little did I know that this seemingly innocent decision would turn my night into a nightmare. I pulled into the Five Guys parking lot, which was practically empty at that hour. As I turned off the car, I noticed that the restaurant lights were off. Frustration took over as I realized the place had already closed. I was about to start the car again when I noticed a man approaching. Instinctively, I tensed up. After all, it was late at night in a deserted place. The man gestured for me to lower the window. I hesitated for a moment, but ended up opening a small crack. "Sorry to bother you," he said, looking embarrassed, "but my car battery died, and I really need some help. Would you happen to have any jumper cables?" At that moment, I felt a mix of compassion and caution. On one hand, I've been in similar situations and know how frustrating it is to be stranded with a dead battery. On the other, a voice in the back of my mind warned me to be careful. I decided to trust my instinct to help. "Sure, I think I have cables in the trunk," I replied, trying to sound friendly but keeping a firm tone of voice. I got out of the car, feeling the cold night air against my face, and walked to the back of the vehicle to get the cables. As I rummaged through the trunk, I heard the sound of engines. I looked over my shoulder and saw two large pickup trucks entering the parking lot. At first, I thought they were just other travelers stopping to rest. But something about the way they moved, slowly and with purpose, made my heart race. The truck stopped, one in front and one behind my car, completely blocking my exit. It was at that instant that I realized I had fallen into a trap. Panic instantly took over me. My body went rigid, and I felt a chill in my stomach that had nothing to do with the night temperature. The man who had asked for help now displayed a sinister smile, totally different from the helpless expression he had shown moments before. I saw silhouettes moving inside the trucks, and doors began to open. My mind screamed for me to do something, anything, to get out of that situation. Without thinking twice, I dropped the jumper cables and ran. Not to my car, it was blocked, but to the woods behind the parking lot. I heard shouts behind me, heavy footsteps chasing me. My heart was beating so hard, it felt like it was going to explode. Branches and bushes scratched my face and arms as I plunged deeper into the darkness of the woods. I didn't know where I was going. I just knew I needed to get as far away from that parking lot as possible. Adrenaline propelled me, making me run like never before. I don't know how long I ran. Minutes seemed like hours in that oppressive darkness. Eventually, the sounds of pursuit diminished, but I didn't dare stop. I kept moving, now more slowly, trying to make as little noise as possible. My heavy breathing echoed in the quietness of the forest, and every twig that snapped under my feet made me shudder. I found a large fallen tree and hid behind it, finally allowing myself to stop to catch my breath and try to process what was happening. There, crouched in the darkness, with my heart still racing, I began to feel the weight of the situation. I was alone, lost in an unknown forest, without a phone, without a wallet, with nothing but the clothes on my back. The fear of what might happen if those men found me was paralyzing. But what anguished me almost as much was the uncertainty about what was happening to my car. With all my things, I stayed there, motionless, for what seemed like an eternity, debating with myself whether I should try to go back or continue moving away. After what felt like hours, I decided I needed to risk going back to the parking lot. The silence of the forest was almost deafening, and the darkness was beginning to give way to a faint glow of dawn. I walked slowly, each step calculated, my senses on high alert. At every noise, I froze, fearing it was the men still looking for me. The way back seemed infinitely longer than when I had fled, disorientation and fear distorting my perception of time and space. Finally, I spotted the lights of the Five Guys parking lot through the trees. My heart raced again, but this time with anxiety and hope. Maybe, by some miracle, my car would still be there intact. I approached cautiously, hiding behind bushes and observing carefully. The parking lot seemed empty, with no sign of the trucks or anyone else. I took a deep breath and, gathering all the courage I had left, came out of the woods. The sight that greeted me was devastating. My car was there, but completely vandalized. The windows were smashed, the doors wide open, and it was evident that it had been looted. I approached the car with trembling steps, feeling a mixture of relief at being alive and despair at the state of the vehicle. The interior was chaos, the dashboard ripped out, wires exposed, and my luggage completely ransacked. Everything of value was gone: my laptop, camera, even the clothes I had brought for the trip. The worst was finding my empty wallet thrown on the car floor. Documents, credit cards, cash all taken. I stood there, looking at that scene of destruction, feeling completely vulnerable and violated. With trembling hands, I managed to find my cell phone hidden under the passenger seat, apparently the only item the thieves hadn't found. I immediately called the police. My voice choked as I reported what had happened. The minutes of waiting seemed to drag on forever. I sat on the sidewalk in front of Five Guys, still closed, watching the movement on the road begin to increase with the sunrise. Cars passed by, some drivers casting curious glances at the scene, but no one stopped. I felt invisible, as if the world kept turning normally while mine had been turned upside down. When the police finally arrived, I was bombarded with questions. I tried to describe the men, the trucks, everything I could remember, but my memory seemed like a confused blur. The officers took notes, photographed the car, and informed me they would do their best, but their expressions didn't give me much hope. Unfortunately, this type of scam has become common around here, one of them commented, making my stomach sink even further. I stayed there, giving my statement, filling out forms, feeling increasingly helpless. The following hours were a whirlwind of calls to insurance, the bank, family. I had to wait for a tow truck to take my now unusable car to a nearby garage. As I waited, sitting on a bench at the now open Five Guys, I couldn't stop thinking about how everything had changed in a matter of minutes. The trip that was supposed to be an adventure had turned into a nightmare. Even now, months later, I still find myself looking over my shoulder in empty parking lots, distrusting strangers asking for help. That night left invisible scars, a sense of vulnerability I had never experienced before. And the worst part is knowing that I'll probably never have answers, never know who those men were or why I was chosen as a target. It's an open wound that may never fully heal. Third story, to this day, I still can't quite understand what happened that night. It's been months, but every time I remember, I feel a chill down my spine. It all started on a Thursday night. I was returning from a business trip, driving on the interstate. It was past midnight, and I was exhausted, you know. The kind of tiredness that makes your eyes burn and your head heavy. I decided to stop at a rest area to stretch my legs, grab a coffee, and use the bathroom. I thought it would be just a quick stop, the kind you don't even remember later. But boy, was I wrong. I entered the rest area bathroom, and as soon as I opened the door, I felt something strange in the air. I couldn't explain it, but it was as if someone was watching me. I looked around and saw a guy standing near the sinks. He was completely motionless, staring at the mirror. I don't know what it was, but something was very wrong with that scene. The guy wasn't even blinking. I tried to ignore that weird feeling and went to use the urinal, but I couldn't stop looking at the guy out of the corner of my eye. He was still there, standing like a statue. My heart started racing, and I began to sweat. I finished as quickly as I could and ran out of there. I didn't even wash my hands. I just wanted to leave. I returned to the car with shaky legs, locking the doors as soon as I got in. I sat there for a few minutes, trying to calm down and convince myself that I was overreacting. After all, the guy could just be having a bad day or something, right? But even as I told myself this, I couldn't get that image out of my head. I started the car and left as fast as I could, wanting to put as much distance as possible between me and that place. I drove for another hour, still feeling a bit paranoid. I kept looking in the rearview mirror, expecting to see a car following me. But the road was practically empty at that hour of the night. When I saw the sign for another rest area, I decided to stop again. I was still nervous, but I was also dying for sleep and desperately needed coffee to make it home. I parked near the convenience store, thinking I'd grab a coffee to go and quickly return to the car. That's when I noticed a car entering the parking lot. Normally, I wouldn't pay attention, but something made me look more carefully. And that's when my blood ran cold. It was the same model and color as the car that had been parked at the previous rest area. I sat paralyzed in the car, watching through the rearview mirror. The vehicle parked a few spots away, and my heart almost stopped when I saw who got out. It was the same guy from the bathroom. I'm absolutely sure. He looked directly at my car and started walking towards me. At that moment, fear took over. My hands were shaking so much I could barely turn the key in the ignition. I started the car and peeled out, not even looking back. I drove like a madman for the next few miles, exceeding the speed limit and checking the rearview mirror every second. My mind was racing. How had that guy found me? Why was he following me? What did he want? I tried to convince myself it was just a coincidence, but deep down, I knew it wasn't. After about 20 minutes without seeing any sign of him, I started to calm down a bit, but I was still far from home, and fatigue was getting the better of me. I saw a sign indicating another rest area 3 miles ahead and decided to risk one more stop. I needed to use the bathroom again and thought it would be safe since I had left that guy behind. What a mistake. I arrived at this new rest area and parked very close to the bathroom entrance. I looked around several times before getting out of the car, making sure there was no one around. The place was deserted, which made me even more nervous. I ran into the bathroom and went straight to a stall, locking the door behind me. I had barely sat down when I heard the bathroom door open. My heart raced immediately. I tried to stay as quiet as possible, praying it was just another traveler. But then I heard slow, heavy footsteps approaching my stall. The footsteps stopped right in front of the door. I remained absolutely silent, barely breathing. That's when I saw a pair of shoes appear in the gap under the door. They were the same shoes as the guy from the first bathroom. I froze. He stood there motionless, not saying anything, just waiting. The seconds felt like hours. I didn't know what to do. My phone was in my pocket, but I was afraid to make any movement. What if he tried to break down the door? What if he had a weapon? My mind was racing, imagining the worst possible scenarios. I don't know how long I stayed there, paralyzed with fear, but it felt like an eternity. The guy was still standing in front of the stall, not saying a word. I could hear his heavy breathing on the other side of the door. In a moment of desperation, I decided I had to do something. With trembling hands, I took my phone out of my pocket as quietly as possible. I opened the keypad and dialed 911, praying that the call wouldn't make any noise. When the operator answered, I whispered as low as I could, explaining the situation and giving the location of the rest area. The operator told me to stay calm and that the police were on their way. She stayed on the line with me, which gave me a little relief. But the guy was still out there, motionless. Suddenly, I heard a noise. He was trying to open the stall door. My heart nearly jumped out of my chest. I held my breath, clutching the phone with all my strength. The handle was moving up and down, and I could hear the door creaking. I thought I was going to faint from fear. That's when I heard the sweetest sound in the world, sirens approaching. I've never been so happy to hear the police coming. The sirens seemed to scare the guy. I heard his hurried footsteps moving away and the bathroom door slamming. I stayed there, still locked in the stall, too scared to come out. The 911 operator was still on the line, telling me to wait until the police found me. A few minutes later, which felt like an eternity, I heard male voices entering the bathroom, identifying themselves as police officers. Only then did I unlock the door, my legs so wobbly I could barely stand. The officers helped me out of the stall and started asking questions about what had happened. I told them everything, from the first encounter at the previous rest area to the moment the guy tried to open the stall door. They listened attentively, taking notes and reassuring me. One of the officers stayed with me while the other went out to look for the suspect in the area. Apparently, when they arrived, they saw a car leaving the parking lot in a hurry, but they couldn't catch up to it. I was relieved to be safe, but at the same time terrified by the idea that that guy was still out there somewhere. The officers accompanied me to my car and swept the area to ensure everything was safe. They advised me to go straight home without stopping anywhere else and gave me the police station number in case I noticed anything suspicious on the way. Before leaving, one of the officers told me something that disturbed me even more. Apparently, it wasn't the first time they had received reports of a strange man stalking travelers in the rest areas of that region. I kept thinking about how many other people might have gone through the same terror as me. The rest of the trip was a blur of mixed anxiety and relief. I arrived home exhausted, both physically and emotionally. In the days that followed, I couldn't stop thinking about what had happened. I became obsessed, looking for news about similar incidents, but never found anything conclusive. To this day, months later, I don't know who that man was or why he followed me. I don't know if he was caught or if he's still out there, scaring other travelers. What I do know is that this experience completely changed my perspective on traveling alone. Now, whenever I hit the road, I can't help but look over my shoulder, wondering if I'll see that face in the mirror again. It's a fear I carry with me, and honestly, I don't know if it will ever go away.